How's it going, everyone? It is 1:46 in the morning on Wednesday, prior to the earnings announcements and the CPI report. So, a lot of stuff coming up, but I want to make a quick video before I called it an evening. Just on something I kind of mentioned in the last video, as far as the weekly review goes. Not entirely market moving, but Twitter released earlier today basically a legal statement in response to basically Musk's attempt to back out of the pre-agreed to contract. And so I kind of touched on my conspiracy theory a little bit earlier, and I think I'm going to kind of comment and kind of lead up to that. Why, I don't understand what there is as far as contractually in the way, and B, there's also an article I was reading that I'm going to post in the description of the video below that kind of hammers home the point I was making last week about how he, in his attempt to quote-unquote acquire Twitter, never really was taken seriously. From the Twitter legal team was, Musk apparently believes he, unlike every other party subject to Delaware contract law, is free to change his mind, trash the company, disrupt its operations, destroy shareholder wealth, and walk away. The article continues on in their legal proceedings, and it says, this repudiation follows a long list of material contractual breaches by Musk. Again, it continues, Twitter wants to compel consummation of the merger following satisfaction of the outstanding conditions. And then it basically says Twitter is citing that Musk's actions were in bad faith and started acting against the deal when the market started turning. So when it says the market started turning, it's actually alluding to obviously the precipitous decline we've had in the equities markets, because he was obviously leveraging on top of selling, but also leveraging his Tesla position to finance this deal. So I think there's two things here. Just full disclosure, personally, I don't think Musk should be allowed to buy Twitter. I think someone who has opinions, whether you agree or disagree, whether it be Musk or Biden or anybody really, that's that politically charged, I don't think they should be able to control the dissemination of information, which is what Twitter is. You're controlling a platform that disseminates information and basically allows you the ability to state and paint in a public manner whatever it is that your theory is, your thesis, or your opinion on any sort of point. So I personally don't think that, even as this deal was being constructed, that the SEC should have even allowed it, but that's a whole other side story. It was allowed in theory, because this has never really actually gone through. But getting back to that, that's my personal perspective, and that's not for me to decide, that's for the courts to decide. News that is not surprising at all and seems to be playing out just as people predicted a month ago. Elon Musk has officially claimed that Twitter is in breach of its merger agreement and says he's pulling out of the deal. As we noted back in June, he appeared to have hired some very expensive lawyers to come up with some sort of pretext for walking away. For much of the month of May, Musk telegraphed his intentions to bail on the deal by whining about how much spam there was. This made no sense at any level. First, when Musk announced the deal, he insisted he was doing it in order to tackle the spam challenge on the platform. And then this continues to go on. So his second attempt to come up with an excuse was to claim that Twitter publicly lied to SEC in its filings regarding how much spam was counted among its monetizable daily active users. And it continues, this also seemed ridiculous as Twitter had publicly reporting these numbers. And for those of you who don't know, they've actually reported to the SEC filings with an estimation of how many quote-unquote bots they believe to be on the platform. This is great. And thus behold the bullshit brilliance of the lawyers at Skadden Arps, who earned their large paycheck by zeroing in on the part of the deal about needing to supply Musk with information necessary to close the deal. Now, Musk's lawyers are looking at saying, all right, we have a contingency in there saying that we will complete and terminate the deal upon basically the reception of this data that we're requesting, but it doesn't specify exactly what data it is in the contract. It's just that the data that he requested. There's some this is basically just a very expensive way of saying you promised us to provide us everything we needed, so we kept asking for more and more ridiculous and impossible to actually deliver information until we could claim you weren't giving us what we needed, and so now we can claim you're in breach. And this kind of goes back to what I was discussing in the last video. The equity markets from the very get-go sniffed all this out. They knew the 30-day contract was basically in effect, so he could essentially within 30 days state that there had been breach or that there had been some sort of failure to comply with the contract, and the contract could be terminated. So, but that doesn't allow you to just basically, and specifically in this case, it didn't allow him to just walk away for absolutely no reason. There's a $1 billion breakup fee, but that $1 billion breakup fee was under the terms that there was a legitimate issue. And this goes back to what I was going to say last week as well. Musk actually had access to what they call the full Twitter Firehouse API, which is essentially their information on every tweet ever generated on their platform. There's no more data you can request. Musk obviously is claiming that's not the case, so it's in that situation, it's basically whose side do you believe. Musk lawyers throw a Hail Mary, claiming that because there were management changes after the merger agreement was announced, that this somehow violated another clause of the agreement to, quote, preserve substantially intact the material components of its current business organization. So, as you've known, there's been a reshuffling on the Twitter board, and the chairman and some of the key executives on the actual team themselves. But again, Musk in this whole process has basically called for the firing of the entire board to begin with. So to say that there was somehow a substantial change to the material components of the business organization based off that, I don't see how that would hold up in court. And to wrap this all up, it's kind of like, why does this matter? How is this important? This is kind of, and again, I don't own either of these equities. This kind of basically gets back to the importance of contractual law. If contractual law is not have founding or backing, if it's only words, and you can have people basically signing contracts, and whether or not they are executable is dependent upon the socioeconomic status of the individual executing the contract, then really, what kind of law do you have? But the actual importance of this is basically what Twitter is alluding to in their letter. In the very, very beginning of the first sentence I read you, where it says Musk apparently believes he, unlike every other party subject to Delaware contract law, is free to change his mind. And I don't believe that's actually a good precedent to set. And it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. So bringing this back to the whole conspiracy theory. So Musk knew there was a 30-day contract. So he basically had 30 days to find a reason or to try and find a way to potentially get out of the contract. And that's part of the reason why he obviously hired a law firm. But he's, again, going back to what we discussed in the other video, he sold $8.5 billion worth of Tesla. If you assume that the $8.5 billion was sold at $1,000 a share, you're talking about 30% decrease in the $8.5 billion. So by selling Tesla and claiming it was to purchase Twitter, he basically provided cover to do a massive capital raise without raising any red flags, knowing as a CEO the headwinds that the company would be facing. And it's not just things that he could potentially see privately. He's also discussed things publicly as to how they've been burning a lot of cash on a lot of their expansive projects, everything from Texas to Germany, etc. He even called them cash burning furnaces himself. So if he saw potentially the equity price getting cut in half and he wanted to take a large stake out of the company, again, one of the ways to do this was to create this mirage of buying a secondary company, and then 30 days later stating, oh, well, I'm not actually going to buy this because of a issue that I knew about the entire time, and now I got to try and get out of the contract. So that's your weekly Tesla conspiracy update, and I think this actually does carry importance. Getting back to earlier discussions, this is actually very significant for contractual law. And if you think about, for example, even the SPAC markets and all these other markets, when you're going to do these large mega deals, whether it be taking a company public or bringing it in private or anything like that, in order for the markets to function properly, you have to have basically some sort of faith and common understanding that the contract is backed by something, that it's not just worth paper, right? So just as in the dollar bill, if you look at a dollar bill, it's backed by the faith of the U.S. government, your faith in the U.S. government, essentially, if you will. These contracts, if they're not enforceable, then what are they backed by? It's just paper. And so from that standpoint, I think this is actually a very interesting, basically a very interesting dispute. And we'll see how this carries out in the next couple months, because I don't see this ending anytime soon. I think it will actually go to court, and this thing could drag out for a year or so, but it'd be interesting to see how the contract's treated, whether it's enforced or upheld, and kind of what the reasoning is